Turning over to the other side of Congress. Joining tonight, two distinguished senators. Michael Bennet is a Democrat from Colorado. Mike Crapo is Republican from Idaho. Senator Crapo, I begin with you. Pardon my cynicism. I don't see this exercise going anyplace particularly constructive. What do you want to see? You both of Simpson Bowles and the Gang of Six. What should the super committee people be doing?
Well, first of all, they should be looking at something in the neighborhood of a $4 trillion deficit reduction. Less than that does not get us to a point where we can stabilize our fiscal policy in this country. Secondly, they need to be looking at the revenue side with a pro-growth tax policy that reforms the code by reducing the rates and growing the revenue. And as we've talked before, we can do that in a way that will stimulate the economy while generating the revenue we need for that part of the equation. And then, of course, we need to have the entitlement reform and the discretionary spending, but as important as all of that, an enforcement mechanism that makes sure that Congress has to stay with the deal.
Mr. Bennet, again, pardon my cynicism. I don't see the spending cuts in this super committee discussion. I certainly don't see the entitlement cuts. Everybody's backed away from that. I'm not sure about the enforcement procedures. I think the baseline's going to be fiddled around to include, Afghanistan and Iraq money that wouldn't be spent anyway. What's your take on this? This thing just looks rotten to me.
Well, first of all, Larry, it might be possible that you know more about what's going on in that committee than I do. I want to say something very unusual for somebody in Washington, D.C., and that is that I agree with everything that Senator Crapo just said about what this deal ought to look like. It shouldn't be that hard. And, there's a lot of talk up here about how there are these, competing political ideologies. Everybody's so far apart. And that's true in Washington. It is not true in my state of Colorado, where people are expecting us to get our work done. And that's why I've enjoyed working with Senator Crapo and others to see if we couldn't move a more comprehensive and balanced plan that has the elements that he described and get something meaningful done for the American people.
Senator Crapo.
Oh, and by the way, you are right to alert us to the possibility that there will be all kinds of tricks in what comes if it's the typical Washington deal. If it looks like the way, for example, we resolved the debt ceiling conversation in this summer, which I think shattered confidence in this economy, most importantly, but certainly also in the Congress, we're going to see that movie again, which is why we need to be vigilant about it.
Well, look, I'm reporting on this thing every night. We've had a lot of distinguished people. We had Jeb Henseling on last evening, but again, I think the two sides are very far apart. Maybe I'm wrong. Senator Crapo, let me just stay on this spending reform stuff, because I think this is going to be a gigantic disappointment. And I just wonder, sir, might it not be better to just take the across-the-board budget trigger for now, the so-called sequestration, and just start over next year along the lines that you and Mr. Bennet want?
Well, first of all, if you are assuming in your question that we get no pro-growth agenda out of this, no reform of the tax code and just a tax increase, or if you are assuming that we don't get structural entitlement reforms out of the deal, then there's something to say for not doing that deal and trying to build a better solution. I don't know that we have the time to wait, though, frankly. The time for gridlock is over, and we're going to see a dramatic reaction in our markets if we don't show the world that we have the capacity to work together. That's why Mike Bennet and I are working together. And as you know, 46 Republicans and Democrats in the Senate and 100 Republicans and Democrats in the House have committed that we understand how big this threat is, and we understand how imminent it is, and we're ready to help the super committee get to the kind of deal that has to be achieved.
Yeah, but see what reason I'm so skeptical, Senator Bennet. Look, I'm just going to read late afternoon WallStreetJournal.com. Wednesday, a bipartisan group of lawmakers from both the House and the Senate, both sides of the aisle, are pushing the super committee people towards a big deal that will really lower budget spending. They're not even talking about it. They're arguing over the size of the revenue increase. I mean, maybe there'll be tax reform. Color me skeptical. In other words, I'd like to see a full-fledged argument about entitlement reform, about Medicare reform, about Medicaid reform, about the smaller but mandatory spending. That's where the problems in the budget are. This thing's all about raising tax revenues, sir. That's my problem.
Well, I don't think any deal that's all about raising tax revenue will get out of that committee, and it certainly won't pass the United States Senate. Look, the elements of the plan are the ones that Mike talked about earlier: discretionary spending, entitlement reform, and tax reform. And people in our states know that. They also know this, that the $4 trillion that we're talking about over the next 10 years is a modest attempt to deal with the trajectory of our debt, that the $1.2 trillion that the committee has been assigned to get to isn't going to substantially change the fiscal condition of this country or move us in the right direction. And I hope the members of the committee are hearing the voices that were at that press conference today and realizing that there are people on both sides of the aisle in both houses who are prepared to go back to vote for this deal and are prepared to go home and explain in town halls in red parts of their states and blue parts of the states why this was the right thing to do for the country for once.
Well, for once, Mr. Crapo, can this deal pass the Senate if you have a sequester? Is that automatic, or does it have to pass the Senate?
Does the sequester?
Yeah.
I'm not sure I understand the question.
In other words, if they fall back on the across-the-board budget cuts, which would be $1.2 trillion, is that automatic, or does it have to pass the Senate and then the House?
No, the sequester is automatic, and it happens if we don't hit the $1.2 trillion through some kind of a vote in the Senate and the House.
So why not? Why not just take that and run and start up next month? I'm sorry, 2 months, 6 weeks, 8 more weeks, and do it the way you guys want to do it.
Well, we may end up having to build the bigger plan in subsequent steps, but the bottom line is that we've got to do what we can in this step, and I don't believe that we are just going to be focused on tax increases. That will not happen. We need to focus on what we've been able to build such a broad bipartisan support for here, and that is about a 3-to-1 ratio of spending cuts to revenue, and then we can build from there to the enforcement and achieve the ultimate solution.
All right, Senators Michael Bennet and Mike Crapo, we appreciate it. I remind everybody, we just passed the $15 trillion gross debt line today.